You've seen it before. The raised voice in a small room. The sharp tone over nothing important. Someone leaning forward, chest out, trying to take space they haven't earned. And for a second you feel it, that pressure, that instinct to either push back or step away. But then another thought slips in. Quiet. Uncomfortable. Why does this feel rehearsed? Here's the part most people don't like to admit. Real strength doesn't need volume. And the moment someone reaches for intimidation, something else has already failed. Watch closely. The tougher the performance, the thinner the core. The louder the voice, the less control behind it. That's not an opinion. That's a pattern. You don't need theory to see it. Look at who actually moves outcomes. The person who decides without announcing it. The one who speaks last, if at all. The one whose silence makes others adjust. Now here's where it gets personal. When someone acts tough, your body reacts before your mind does. Heart rate up. Focus narrows. You start playing their game without realizing it. That's the trap. Aggression wants a mirror. It needs resistance or fear to exist. Without that feedback, it collapses. So instead of asking, how do I deal with this person? Well, try a different experiment. What happens if you don't interpret their behavior as power at all? Not as a threat, not as dominance, but as information. Because that's what it is. There are two kinds of power. One needs to be seen. The other works whether you're watching or not. One is noise. The other is leverage. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people never learn the difference, so they spend their lives reacting to performances. The intelligent move isn't to challenge the display, and it isn't to submit to it either. It's to see through it so clearly that it stops affecting your decisions. When you do that, something shifts. Their pressure loses timing, their threats lose weight, their presence shrinks. Not because you fought back, but because there was nothing left to push against. This isn't about being calm for the sake of morality. It's strategy. Silence as positioning. Restraint as control. And once you start noticing how often false power announces itself, you'll begin to wonder something else. If real power doesn't need to prove itself, why are so many people still trying so hard? You can spot it fast if you've seen it enough times. Someone keeps reminding the room how smart they are, how experienced, how dangerous. They repeat it, they sharpen it, they wait for reactions. And if you're honest, part of you still feels the pull, the tension in your shoulders, the instinct to take them seriously just because they're loud about it. Here's the uncomfortable cut. What actually speaks for itself never keeps talking. Real influence moves quietly. Decisions change. Doors close or open. No announcement, no ceremony. Fake power does the opposite. It performs. It over-explains. It leans forward and dares you to believe. Watch the pattern. The person who threatens constantly burns out fast. The one who survives for years is usually underestimated, calm, strategic. Not because they are nicer, because they don't waste energy proving what will become obvious later. Try a small experiment the next time someone acts tough. Don't react to the tone. Don't respond to the volume. Ignore the display and look for the tool set, because there are only two modes here: substance or noise, capability or theater. And this matters more than it sounds. Once you see the performance as the weakness, the pressure shifts. The yelling stops feeling dangerous. The intimidation starts looking limited. That manager who rules through fear isn't showing authority. They're showing they have no other leverage. The guy who keeps talking about how hard he is isn't signaling strength. He's telling you that without words, there's nothing there. This is where intelligent people separate themselves, not by judging, by analyzing. What is missing that needs to be covered up? What option do they not have access to? What happens if this one tool stops working? Here's the quiet truth most people don't like hearing. Aggression is rarely a choice, it's a default. When someone lacks alternatives, they escalate force. When someone lacks skill, they raise pressure. When someone lacks internal certainty, they demand external submission. Competence doesn't need to push. Value pulls on its own. Security doesn't ask for proof. And once you understand that, something irreversible happens. You stop feeling challenged. You stop feeling rushed. You stop stepping into games designed for weaker players. But this only works if you know what to do next, because seeing through intimidation is just the first move. What replaces reaction? When pressure no longer works on you. You notice it the moment pressure appears. The voice gets louder. The body gets closer. The words turn sharp, urgent, exaggerated, and if you're honest, your first reaction isn't strategy, it's instinct, a flicker of fear, a need to respond. Here's the uncomfortable part. When someone has nothing else, aggression becomes their only option, not because it works best, because it's all they have. If a person lacks real skill, they can't create value. If they lack strategy, they can't plan. If they lack inner stability, they can't stand without applause, so they reach for force, volume, threats, posturing. Not strength, a shortage of alternatives. There's a quiet trick hidden inside this behavior. They're betting on one thing, that you'll confuse performance with capability, and most people do. Someone raises their voice, and the room tightens. Someone threatens, and fear fills the gap. Someone acts dominant, and others shrink without checking why. Try a different experiment. The next time it happens, don't ask how to respond. Ask what tool they're missing. Because there are only two paths here: reaction or analysis, emotion or leverage. Once you see aggression as a substitute, not a weapon, the dynamic flips. The intimidation starts feeling thin, predictable, fragile. Here's the shift that changes everything. If intimidation is their only tool, then it only works when you react. So don't. Not dramatically, not defiantly, just don't. Someone yells, you answer at normal volume. You restate what they said cleanly, without heat. Something strange happens. Their intensity hangs in the air with nowhere to land. Someone threatens. You acknowledge it the way you'd acknowledge the weather. No challenge, no fear. Someone tries to dominate the space. You don't mirror it. You don't retreat. You continue as if the performance didn't exist. This is where the real pressure begins. Not on you, on them. Because their entire strategy depends on your reaction. Fear validates them. Anger validates them. Even resistance validates them. Calm does not. When they realize their only weapon isn't working, the mask slips. The volume wavers. The posture weakens. The act collapses. And this is only the first layer. Because once you remove intimidation from the equation, what's left tells you exactly how to move next. And that's where the real advantage starts. You can feel the shift when you don't bite. The room expects tension to rise. Voices sharpen. Eyes watch for your reaction. And instead, you pause. That pause does something dangerous. It exposes the scene for what it is, a performance, a script that only works if you play your part. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When you stay calm while someone else loses control, everyone notices. Not because you dominate, but because you refuse the game. And now they face a problem. Either they push this act all the way into real violence, which most won't risk, or they pull back. And pulling back shatters the image they were trying to sell. This is where control quietly changes hands. Try a different experiment. Instead of standing your ground emotionally, step away strategically, not in fear, in choice. If someone is acting tough to drag you into a fight that benefits them, don't enter the arena. Let them speak into the air. Let them raise their voice. Let them posture. Then remove yourself. Not dramatically, not angrily, just clean and calm. I'm not continuing this while you're yelling. Let me know when you're ready to talk normally. Notice what that does. You didn't submit. You set the terms. This is where many people get it wrong. They think leaving means losing. In reality, it's selection. You're deciding which games are worth playing. And that decision terrifies people whose only leverage is presence and pressure. Because the moment you disengage, their power evaporates. They can't control someone who doesn't stay. But there's another layer, more subtle, more destabilizing. Sometimes the strongest move isn't distance, it's redirection. When someone acts tough, they usually want one thing from you: fear or resistance. So give them neither. Someone yells. Instead of bracing, you tilt your head slightly. You seem really frustrated. What's actually bothering you? Watch the confusion. Someone tries to intimidate. You ignore the tone and address the problem. Okay, you're unhappy with this. Here are a few options. Pick one. Someone steps into your space, chest out, eyes locked. You respond like you didn't even register the threat. Hey, you all right? You look tense. This breaks the script. They were prepared for a fight or for submission. Not for calm curiosity, not for practical solutions, not for indifference to the performance, and now they don't know where to go next. That moment of disorientation is leverage. Because once their aggression stops working, you're no longer reacting, you're steering. And this is still just the surface, because when intimidation fails, something else always reveals itself. And knowing how to use that reveal is where real advantage begins. You can see it the moment the script breaks. They came prepared for fear, for resistance, for emotional noise. They weren't prepared for calm. When you treat their performance like background static, something strange happens. They freeze. Because intimidation is their only language and you're not speaking it, here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people who rely on pressure have no second move. No plan once volume fails. No way to shift into real problem solving. So they face a bad choice. Escalate until it looks ridiculous, or pull back and lose the image they've been protecting. Either way, the mask cracks. Now shift the frame. Stop thinking in terms of dominance. Think in terms of consequences. There are two kinds of fear. One comes from known ability, the other comes from noise. One shapes behavior, the other just makes people avoid you. Watch the difference. A leader who quietly enforces clear standards doesn't need threats. People know what happens if they fail. Not because of shouting, because of consistency. But the person who yells, who promises punishment, but never follows through, earns something else. Not fear, contempt. People don't comply. They sidestep, they delay, they emotionally disengage. That's not authority. That's isolation wearing the costume of power. Here's the part that lands close. Acting tough doesn't make people respect you. It makes them manage you. They don't trust your judgment. They don't want your approval. They just want distance. And intelligent people see this early. That's why they don't perform toughness themselves. They invest elsewhere. In competence that creates leverage, in fairness that builds trust, in unpredictability that keeps their full capacity hidden. When people need what you provide, you don't need intimidation. When your decisions are consistent, you don't need volume. When your capability is real, you don't need to announce it. And this is where influence actually compounds. not through fear theatrics, but through quiet, visible results. But here's the open question most never ask. If acting tough pushes people away, what pulls them toward you instead? Because that answer determines whether power stays temporary or becomes something you don't have to defend at all. You notice the difference when consequences finally appear. No raised voice, no warning speech, just a calm action that lands exactly where it was promised. And for a moment, it's unsettling. Because this kind of response doesn't perform. It confirms. Quiet consequences are heavier than noise. They don't ask for attention, they prove capability. Here's the uncomfortable angle. Every time someone acts tough, they expose their ceiling. They show you the limit of what they can do. This is as far as I go. This is my maximum force. That's advertising. And it's a mistake. The intelligent person doesn't reveal their full range. They stay unreadable, strategically unclear. You don't know what they can do next. And that uncertainty carries more weight than shouting ever could. There's another cost most people miss. Aggression manufactures enemies. Every person pressured becomes a quiet observer, waiting, watching for leverage, looking for timing. Not because they're brave, because resentment accumulates. Some enemies are unavoidable. Most are optional. Creating unnecessary enemies through performance isn't strength. It's poor accounting. And it gets worse. Aggression traps you in the present. It forces reaction. It narrows vision. The person acting tough isn't planning. They're trying to win this moment, this exchange, this feeling. Meanwhile, someone else is running a longer game. What do I need here? What outcome actually matters? What path costs the least energy and risk? Often, force isn't even on the list. There's a subtle strategy that aggressive people can't use. Appearing weaker than you are. Holding back. Letting others misjudge you. Once you announce yourself through intimidation, that option disappears. You've chosen dominance now over positioning later. And in the long game, that choice is fatal. So what's the smartest response to people who act tough? Not confrontation, not matching energy, not trying to win the performance. You make them irrelevant. You maneuver around them. You design outcomes where their behavior has no impact. You remove their role in what actually matters to you. And when someone's aggression no longer affects your objectives, they stop being powerful instantly. What that looks like in real situations is where the real leverage begins. Because once you know how to reduce someone's pressure to noise, you're no longer reacting, you're deciding. And that's the point where control quietly changes hands. You recognize the pattern fast. The coworker leans in, voice tight, eyes sharp, trying to make the room smaller. And for a moment, it works. You feel the pull to respond, to defend, to push back. Here's the uncomfortable shift. You don't engage at all, you keep working, quietly. You connect with people who actually decide things. You position yourself where opportunities move, not where drama lives. They stay busy performing. You move forward. Same with the boss who explodes in meetings. The yelling, the threats, the pressure to react. You don't argue, you don't challenge, you document, you stay composed, and slowly you build options they don't see. Alliances, exits, leverage. Now make it personal. Someone in your life uses intimidation to stay relevant. They demand attention through tension. You don't fight them. You don't explain yourself. You reduce access. Gradually, calmly, until one day their presence no longer affects your decisions. This is where power quietly flips. They're obsessed with the moment. With winning this exchange, this reaction, this feeling of control, you're building something else. A structure where their behavior doesn't matter. Two games. Performance versus outcomes. They need confrontation to exist. You design a system that doesn't include them. That's the move most people never learn. Real influence isn't about winning arguments. It's about arranging reality so arguments stop being necessary. Think about it. The person who has to prove toughness every day is exposed. The one whose position is so secure that no one tests it doesn't need to speak. That's the difference. And this pattern isn't theoretical, it's old. When pressure fails, history shows what replaces it. One side keeps threatening, the other keeps building. When the moment finally comes, it's quiet, decisive, irreversible. No speeches, no posturing, just action. That's why the goal was never to beat aggressive people at their own game. Noise, volume, intimidation. The goal was always to make their game irrelevant to your success. And once you understand how to do that in real situations, you stop reacting to pressure entirely because you're no longer inside their arena, and the next move is where that advantage becomes permanent. You can see it in how power shifts when words stop working. A young commander enters the room. Older figures smirk. They interrupt. They test him with tone instead of substance. You've been there too. Dismissed, talked over, measured by noise instead of results. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Arguing back never changes that position. Trying to sound tougher only locks you into their game. So try a different experiment. What happens if you stop responding to pressure and start responding only to reality? There are two paths here. Performance or capability, one looks impressive in the moment, the other compounds quietly. The young commander doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't explain himself. He wins where it matters, consistently, decisively. After a while, something shifts. The same people who mocked him either fall in line or fade out of relevance, not because he dominated conversations, because he dominated outcomes. You can watch the same pattern today if you know where to look. In boardrooms, in negotiations, in rooms where pressure is supposed to decide everything. The most effective leaders don't push back emotionally. They don't try to intimidate the intimidator. They bring numbers, they align interests, they build support quietly. By the time opposition realizes what's happening, the decision is already locked in. That's the difference most people miss. Aggression fights the present. Strategy owns the future. Here's where it turns personal. When someone acts tough around you, it feels urgent. Like you must respond now or lose ground. But urgency is often the trap. People who rely on intimidation are predictable. They escalate, they repeat, they circle the same moves, and predictability is usable. Instead of reacting, ask yourself one thing. What do I actually need from this situation? Not approval, not dominance, results. When you focus on that, your behavior changes. You stop meeting noise with noise. You stop feeding the performance. You plan around them. You build leverage elsewhere. You strengthen what actually matters. Because the real win isn't defeating them publicly. It's succeeding privately while they're still acting. That's why acting tough is often a sign of loss already in progress. Energy spent on display isn't spent on growth. Attention locked on the moment can't see long-term moves. While they chase control now, you build position for later. And that difference decides who stays relevant when the noise finally dies down. You notice it when pressure shows up. They raise the stakes with tone, with looks, with threats meant to freeze you in place. And for a second, it almost works. Your body tightens, your attention narrows. Here's the uncomfortable realization. They're not adapting, they're repeating, they're playing the only game they know, and you don't have to play it. Try a different experiment. Instead of responding inside their frame, change the frame itself. Don't compete on volume. Don't react to urgency. There are two paths here: noise or structure, reaction or positioning. People who act tough rely on visibility. They need you to see them, to feel them, to acknowledge the performance. Real power moves differently. It doesn't announce, it accumulates. That's why intelligent people don't perform toughness, and why they're rarely threatened by it. They understand something most miss. Intimidation is what's left when better tools are gone. So when someone tries to press you, pause. Look past the behavior. Ask what actually matters. What outcome do I need? What position strengthens me long term? This shift is practical. It keeps you out of pointless conflict. It preserves energy. It gives you options. While they exhaust themselves trying to dominate the moment, you're building something quieter, more stable, harder to touch. Let them perform. Let them escalate. An audience that isn't impressed doesn't clap, because the real advantage comes later, when their noise fades and your position remains. That's the lesson hidden in plain sight. Power that needs to prove itself is already under pressure. Power that thinks ahead doesn't need to act tough. It just needs to be smarter.